tonight. I'm very excited about this. I have been focused on this evening for many months because it's an amazing opportunity, because it's not just a Biola thing. This is much bigger than Biola, and my book is bigger than Biola. So I love Biola, and Biola was a great blessing to me. And I'm so excited that some of my best students are here tonight, and they themselves are doing amazing things. I also have many colleagues here and friends from all over the place. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Speak up a little bit.
Can you move forward a little bit? Because my voice will wear out. I'll have to take throat lozenges and stuff like that, you know. So I'm grateful to all of you for coming. And I have to say that the timing of this was intentional, because yesterday was Yom Kippur, the Jewish Day of Atonement. And that is the most important Jewish holiday to me, although I love all the Jewish holidays. But when Jews are praying on Yom Kippur, they're asking for forgiveness. And what Jews do is very unusual. What they do is they confess every imaginable sin as if they themselves did it. Now, if you think about that, and if you know your Bible and you understand what the priestly calling of both the Jewish people and the church are, that we are praying for the world. And the world, as you know, I may even get emotional. The world, as you know, is disordered and depraved. And we see that every day in the news. No matter where you look, if you look at Nigeria for 1 second, if you look at Sudan for 1 second, if you look at Pakistan, Iran, go across the world and show me where things aren't disordered, and how we all should be praying for God's forgiveness, because we're all trapped in what they say is the matrix, right, of sin. And yet God is compassionate, and He understands us, and He's with us. And friends, I've learned through writing this book and the reception that I have received, that God is suffering with us in exile. It's an idea that had never come to me. But I wrote this book, and it was out for a few months, and I got an email from a pastor in the Netherlands, a Dutch pastor. And he wrote to me and said, "Judith, you don't know me, but we've published in the same journal, and I don't know if you recognize my name, but I want you to know that I read your book, and I have been preaching out of it ever since." He is now in Jerusalem for a conference called Back to Jerusalem, and it is a group of Jews and non-Jews who support the state of Israel in their prayers theologically. And so Pastor Edjan Westerman wrote a book that he asked me, would you also read my book? What, for an author, that's a dream, really, to have an author want you to read his book because he read your book. There can't be anything sweeter than that. So I said, well, I'm going to get your book, and it might take me a while, but I want to read it slowly because I can see that it's an important book. It really is. It's a completely revolutionary book called Learning Messiah, and the idea is learning Messiah together, Jews and Gentiles, and believers and non-believers, to understand what is the global meta-narrative that the Bible tells. Now that includes the so-called Old Testament, the Tanakh, and also the New Testament. From my perspective, they're just one continuous narrative. So while I was at Biola, I was the chair of the history department for a time, and I helped to found the political science department. And I'm just going to say this. I follow two political thinkers in my world, John Locke and Edmund Burke. And if you want to understand this world, you need to understand the French Revolution. Okay? I'm telling you now, when I got to Biola, they were not teaching the French Revolution to the students. And I said, okay, that is going to end right now. We're going to switch things around a little bit. We're not going to teach Western civilization and ignore the rest. But we're going to take a biblical perspective and look at God's work throughout history, from creation to the second coming. I don't teach eschatology, but of course it has informed my thinking. But teaching that broad scope and teaching all the different world civilizations and comparing them, and to understand that at this point in time, coming back to the idea of Yom Kippur, we are in a time when we truly do have a global something, but it is definitely not all civilized. Would you agree with me? So there are, now a lot of people have been writing about barbarians versus, the settled peoples, that we're the civilized ones and they're the barbarians. And of course, define barbarians?
Definitely barbarians. Because everyone could think everyone else is different from them, that they're barbarians.
That's right. But the barbarians that people think of are the ones that are wreaking havoc in the world by slaughtering people for no good, discernible, actual reason, except for bad things. Right? So as I was thinking about Yom Kippur and getting ready for this talk, for the past 38 days I've been on a spiritual journey of my own description. And I didn't plan on it, I focused on the idea of going up, ascent, because you go up to the mountain of the Lord to pray. So you want to prepare yourself, to be with the Lord on Yom Kippur. And then as I thought about ascent, I started thinking a lot about descent. And descent means going into the world, but it also can mean rebellion. Because this is a rebellious world we're in. People don't all recognize God. That's the pure truth of the matter. Many of them have no clue who God is, and they have no one teaching them. So my passion for the past 35 years of my life, or maybe more, I haven't counted, has been to edify the Jewish people and the Christian people and the Muslim people. I have friends and dear friends from all three groups. And in my book, I tell the story of my research. So I thought what I would do is sort of talk about my book a little bit, tell you what's in it if you haven't got it. It is available on Kindle online, so it's super cheap. But I recommend the hardback because you can leave it sitting open on your desk. And it's not the kind of book that you just sit down and read. It's a big book, to quote a certain reviewer of mine. Yeah. So the book has this amazing image on the cover. Some of you from Biola might recognize it. It's a close-up of Maya Engelhardt's Western Wall of Calvary Chapel. And it depicts Jesus' resurrection as a moment of a flash of light. To me, as a Jewish Christian, it represents a portal into our times and beyond, into the future. That there's something beautiful about this. Now, the main title of the book is familiar to many Christians, Beauty for Ashes. And it's a play on words in Isaiah. Isaiah has, in verse 61, a little phrase, and it says, Per tachat aftar. It's the same three-letter root, and it actually means a crown for ashes. So I did some, research on this, of course, and when Jews in the days of King David and other ancient Jews would mourn, they would put ashes on their heads. And God is promising that at a funeral, that there will be a wedding. And he will give you a crown. And in the old days, apparently, ancient Jews, when brides would marry, they would wear a crown. Some churches still do that. But after the destruction of the temple, second temple, I think, could be the first temple, but Jews stopped wearing crowns at weddings. But the idea is that a crown of beauty which also indicates the future flourishing of something. Fruit. Fruit is related to the same word. So you have the fruit, something good is going to come out of all of this suffering. Now, there's so much anger and so much hatred out there. You saw it in the mobs in England. England is a place that many people don't recognize. And this isn't a lecture about that, but I've been talking about the global intifada since the war began to expand in 2024. And the global intifada is against all of us. All of us. It's not just the Jewish people in Israel that are at risk, it's all of us. And it breaks my heart to see how it's happening. Many years ago, I was in Brooklyn. I was on the campus of Brooklyn College, which is kind of a Jewish college. I mean, there are so many Jews in Brooklyn College. And I had heard word that the Jewish students who wear kippot, a lot of them are Orthodox Jews, going across campus were being forced to run the gauntlet as anti-Israel people would hiss at them and threaten them. They weren't beating them, but they were being very scary. And so I met with InterVarsity, which is a great ministry on many campuses. And I proposed that Christian students pair up with the Jewish students to walk with them across campus so they wouldn't feel alone. I wish that was an idea that had taken root and that was happening. I saw some pictures on X of Munich where a big group of Christians got around a synagogue to protect the Jews as they worshipped yesterday. There's so much on X and on other social media. You have to be very, very careful about all of this. But I try to follow the news. Karl Barth actually taught, and I'm not quoting him exactly, but he said, preach, not pray, but preach with the Bible in one hand and the newspaper in the other. That means if you're a preacher, you need to be circumspect and aware and understand your times. That's why I taught history and politics, because it's no good if you just are in the Bible and you're not connecting the dots. So my book is written to help you connect the dots. So I'm not going to read from the book because it's dark, and also I can speak extemporaneously as well. There's a very detailed table of contents. So when you get the book, please get the book. It's really important. I'm not going to publish it with any other publishers. I decided I wanted complete control, even to the point of making mistakes, and I did. But I wanted complete control. I didn't want anyone else's agenda messing with me. I've published other things, and I just wanted freedom. So the book this is it. This is the one time it's going to be what it is. So the first chapter is called Friendship in the Time Between Promise and Fulfillment. So promise is about prophecy, and then fulfillment is about the fulfillment of prophecy, because I believe that's important for giving us some sense of orientation in this world, that helps to guide us as we know what to expect. And what is this age that we're in right now but an age of war and rumors of war and all the stuff, right? So the first chapter focuses in on my creds, right? Why am I able to teach you about, who am I, as a student once asked me. When I was teaching at Wayne State University, I had a class full of Muslim students, and this student she was greatly pregnant, hijab. She stood up in class and she said, "Who are you to teach about the Middle East?" And I proudly told her, because I worked with a Qadi, the Imam of Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem, and he helped me to do my research. So yeah, I have complete credibility. There is no one who has had more credibility to teach on this topic than me. And I'm just going to claim it, because I did the excruciatingly hard research, and I stayed in that Islamic court, which is ground zero for the Muslim Brotherhood people. And this dear old man, who had been part of the Muslim Brotherhood, and we were watching Hamas being formed, he said to me, "This has all been a terrible mistake, and I am filled with regret." And later his son was executed in Kuwait for supporting Arafat, and for supporting, well, Arafat supported Saddam Hussein, the son supported Arafat, the guy was killed by the Kuwaitis. So I have complete credibility, and yet this old man and I became friends. And the idea was that he and I agreed is that, you would make a great Muslim, he told me. And I said, you would make a great Christian, and we agreed to disagree, and we had a beautiful friendship. So I tell that story in the beginning of the book. The second chapter is, if you can imagine, a 1-year course for basically not freshmen, but sophomores. Okay, no freshmen, just sophomores, unless they're advanced. They can prove it to me. And this is in question-answer format. So what you have is a question that a student would pose, and then my answer. And it takes you from the very beginning, what is a nation? What is a nation? That's the very beginning of and then who are the Jews? What is Zion? Etc., etc. And it takes you all the way through the modern history of the Middle East. It explains many of the conflicts that I used to teach. So I did my PhD at the University of Chicago in Ottoman history. Later, if someone wants to ask me who are my favorite sultans and Muslim leaders, please ask that question. But I got my MA in Arab thought, okay, in the context of international relations in Arabic. And so one of my specializations is understanding all the political movements in the Arab world from the 19th century forward. And that includes going back into medieval times, because some of the medieval thinkers thought about these things and the modernists used them. So the first chapter is very, very long. And can you hear me now? The next chapter is about a hero of mine, a guy named William E. Blackstone. William E. Blackstone is now remembered on Biola's campus thanks to the work of my handsome husband over there. Paul, wave your hand. He was doing research in the archives because his grandfather was the president of Biola in the 1930s. And what I learned about his grandfather touched my heart and changed my life, because in those days, this man, Paul W. Root I, was going around basically the South, preaching and sending seminarians out from Talbot and saying, you must support the Jews against the Nazis. And he was preaching that word in the 1930s. That meant something to me. So Paul was doing research on that man, and we discovered William E. Blackstone, who has an amazing legacy. He was an evangelist, and he wrote a book called Jesus is Coming, about the second coming. And I forgot to look up how many millions of copies they've sold of that, but it's a really important book about the fulfillment of prophecy. 11 million. 11 million. He looked it up for me. Thank you, honey. So that book was kind of his big accomplishment. But even more important is that he wrote a petition that was circulated among all the great people in the United States, the judges, the newspaper editors, the mayors, governors, all of these important guys, and saying, listen, the Jews in Russia are being persecuted. We need to support them as they emigrate, and we want them to go to, everyone called it Palestine since the Roman period, right? They're all going to go back to Palestine because they were unrightfully displaced by the Romans, and we need to repair that act. And so he is known by Louis Brandeis, a Jewish Supreme Court justice, called him the first Christian Zionist. Now, Christian Zionists today are not like my thing, always. But as I've been doing my work recently, I've actually kind of reclaimed the whole thing. because William E. Blackstone was a thoughtful guy, and if you read my book, you'll see all of his correspondence concerning this and the original language. And he was smart, and he understood international relations before there was a League of Nations, before there was a UN, before any of those things. He was paying attention to all these international conferences. He was looking at what happened in Bulgaria, where millions were, not millions, many were slaughtered. I'm not going to say them all, but the Bulgarian horrors, they called them. And then there was a small group of Jewish people in a small movement called Ahavat Zion, the Lovers of Zion. And William E. Blackstone met them when he was traveling in Europe, and he said, you know, we're going to get behind this. We're going to get behind this group, and we're going to help them. So my book contains all of that information about William E. Blackstone. In 1917, he wrote a postscript and expressed his concern about the direction of the secular political Zionists. And he had some questions about that, but that's another subject. So that's the second chapter. The third chapter is, this is the story that got me to write this book. So in 2017, I was teaching, going, full steam ahead, and I was teaching a high-level upper division course, and my lecture that day was on the Muslim Brotherhood. And I had a small TIA while I was teaching. My speech came out all garbled, and I felt sick. And so I asked a student to get me a drink, and I drank, and I finished the class. Going home, I was feeling kind of terrible. So I called the doctor, and they said, you need to come in right away. Too late, I screwed up. They couldn't really do anything about it, and so, okay, I went back to work the next week. Well, as I continued to work, I started to notice something wasn't right. Like, I started crying a lot. There's a lot to cry about, friends, but I wasn't able to keep it all together. And I went through the summer and into the fall, and honestly, I'm just going to say it, I hit the wall. I had to eventually not only go out on disability, but it was time to retire. I just couldn't keep it up. And I believed at the time that I was a total failure. Because I had failed in my mission. I had a dream. I thought that dream was going to happen, and it wasn't. And I just couldn't. So it was a blessing, actually. God was taking me off the battlefield. I needed to have a break from the battlefield. And so over the next basically 7 years, I had a sabbatical. And I live at the beach. I have 5 grandchildren now. I'm like living the life. I'm writing about the romantic era and women writers. I'm just enjoying my life. I did some other important stuff too, as far as writing goes. But I was living a very quiet life in my little condo, very happily. On October 7th, as we were watching the news, I got a call from a former student of mine. Back in the 1990s, this young man had just come back. He was a veteran, and he was coming to the old Detroit Bible Institute, which was at that time called William Tyndale College, and now is an Islamic center. Anyway, this guy was an African-American, brilliant guy, loved him to pieces. We've stayed in touch all these years. He's a pastor in Tennessee of a Baptist church, but he also is the highest ranking chaplain in the Army. And he was calling me from a secure location, as they say, in Tampa, Florida, where the headquarters of Central Command, which is responsible for the Middle East in the country. And he said, Professor, he always calls me Professor Rude. What is this Al-Aqsa flood, and why did they call it that? And it looks like we're going to be fighting on behalf of Israel, and I need to help my chaplaincy and the soldiers understand what this is going to mean. So I briefed him on the Al-Aqsa flood, and then he said to me, okay, I'm going to call you again in 2 weeks. We're going to have a conference call, and you're going meet with my chaplain group, and you're going to have a question-answer discussion with them. Wow, what an honor. Only God could do such a thing. That's crazy. I have nothing to do with the military. I had made my decision long ago. Just focus on the books, Melissa. No blood on my hands if I can help it, right? Because there are opportunities. But I didn't want to ever be responsible directly for putting anyone in danger. I just am not made that way. But I was so blessed that this young man, he's not that young anymore, honestly, that he remembered me in this way and that my classes had stuck with him. And back in those days in Michigan, there was a Holocaust museum a mile from our campus. And I taught a course for a whole semester where we all went there to do the course. And that building smelled funny. There's something very icky, about that museum. But we were able to really get it. It was my only course on the Holocaust. I didn't have the heart to teach that subject, but that one semester I did. I will tell you another personal thing. My dad is from Germany. He was born in Hamburg in 1933 in January, the year that Hitler came to power. In 1938, as you know, the Nuremberg laws, Kristallnacht, all of that was happening. And my grandmother was able to get the correspondence going with a relative in the U.S. so that they could get out. Because in those days, to become a refugee to the U.S., you had to have a guarantor, a guarantee that you could pay your bills, right? So she worked this out. In the meantime, the Germans arrested my grandfather and sent him to a forced labor camp on the Kiel Canal, where he labored, digging the Kiel Canal for the battleship Bismarck to be able to go into the sea. Well, he escaped because my dear grandfather was a stamp collector, and he received a letter from my grandmother. It had an American stamp on it, and he kept the envelope. Most people just honestly. Well, a guard saw the stamp and said, "Give me that stamp and I'll let you out of here." So for 2 years, my grandfather went into the Eastern Front and got across. He ended up first in Korea, which was occupied by the Japanese, then on to Japan, and then to Canada. And so his life was spared. My grandmother's parents, who were elderly, were deported to Theresienstadt, where they perished from disease. They were starved, and they were living in 2 separate places in attic apartments. Because it's just a great understanding. I've been there. My husband and I went there. We found out where they lived. We found out where they died. We even found where their ashes were buried. So this thing called the Al-Aqsa flood and Hamas is the spawn. It is the spawn. It predates Hitler, but it is the spawn of Nazism. If you don't understand that, you don't understand anything. The global intifada is being fought and supported by people who call everybody who doesn't support the global intifada Nazis and fascists. So it's all upside down and backwards, and we need good teachers who can tell the truth. All right, people don't have memories. You gotta be taught. And there's something called historical amnesia, which I've written a lot about. So the job of the teacher is to edify. The way you edify is by teaching the truth and using facts. And if people will listen, great. And if they don't listen, and if they don't want to learn, then you know. Who's your enemy? Who's your enemy? I talk a lot in the book about theological enemies. I called this whole chapter the Al-Aqsa flood and the Palestinian apocalypse because I remembered Beirut. During the Lebanese civil war, Israel invaded southern Lebanon to crush the PLO, which was supported by Russia and the Soviet Union. They dug tunnels. There was tunnel warfare. It's all like so familiar. And Israel bombed the crap out of Beirut. And a lot of people hate Israel because Israel did that to Lebanon. I know so many Lebanese who hate Israel and the Jewish people because of this. I knew that the response of Israel would be absolutely devastating. I'm not saying that that's the best thing ever in the world, but I knew it was inevitable. And historians have to be realists, and political scientists have to be realists, and I'm a Christian realist. We know human depravity, right? Sin and rebellion. That's what we're dealing with here. So I wrote about the Hamas apocalypse, but I wrote it in a way using the word apocalypse very carefully, because I wanted to say an apocalypse reveals something is changing. A new thing is going to happen, a beginning, a new beginning. Now, what kind of new beginning will it be? We don't know. We're still in the middle of this war. If you read the news even today, Hamas is still playing around. And there is no certainty, and the war is happening. There is a civil war now in Gaza, where some of the clans are rising up against Hamas. But we don't know, and they're not friends of Israel necessarily, just because they're fighting Hamas. It's kind of popular now in Gaza to hate Hamas. It took a while, right? So that chapter goes into great detail what I learned about the Muslim Brotherhood, trying to connect the dots to show that this Al-Aqsa flood is really evil. You know, that was my message to the Pentagon. These guys are bad news. They're bad for the United States. And when the United States went in to fight the mullahs of Iran, I can't say I was sorry. I don't like war. I'd rather not have bombs. But sometimes that's the only way to get a message across. Forgive me for being a realist. And you know what? It may not, all of this warfare that Israel has been engaged in may not solve the problem, because it has spread. It has metastasized throughout the streets and campuses of Europe and the United States. It's an atrocious thing, you know, but nobody wanted to hear this kind of thing. Thank God I had a job at Biola. You know, for a few years, I was able to actually teach a few students about these things so that they have a handle on it. But if I had taught at a big research university, I could never have taught from a Christian perspective, or used the Bible, or said anything, or developed my ideas. So I was sheltered at Biola, and I had amazing students who would ask me hard questions. And they cared, and a lot of those students were very pro-Palestinian. And I said, I don't care if you're pro-Palestinian, but you may not hate Israel. You may not, because it's not right to hate. But they learn it. I went to Fuller Seminary for some events. The students there, I'm just going to say it. It's being recorded. The screeching students at Fuller Seminary about Israel. I was like, come on, you know nothing. Shut up. Just shut up. That's what these fools have to be told. Just shut up. I believe everyone is teachable, you know. And some of my students who graduated, they put things on Facebook that break my heart. And I can't believe it. It's just like a poison out there. And, you know, they think that they're fighting for, you know, justice, social justice. But at what cost? I mean, don't you remember the Gulag? That was for social justice. You know, kill all the dissenters. That's good for the state. What is the common good? Beware of the common good, because sometimes people who want the common good don't want your good. There's so many traps. Well, the final, there's 2 more chapters in this big book. So as I was a university professor, I also was engaged in several reconciliation ministries between Palestinians and Israelis, Israeli Messianic Jews and Palestinian evangelicals. And I went out there mostly just to hear what people were saying, and to understand the conversations. And I realized that what is being preached by the pro-Palestinian evangelicals is supersessionism, that Israel has no place at the table. The Jews can be tolerated, but the church has replaced Israel. And doesn't that fit perfectly, friends, with the Muslim Brotherhood, which is supersessionist and wants to reset up the caliphate? And how many of you would like to live under a caliphate? Because if you're a woman, good luck. If you're a man, it's over. You better just get in line and bow down. No, we treasure our freedom as Americans. My dad, after he came over here, when he was old enough, he served in the U.S. Army, in the Signal Corps, and he went and he hunted Nazis. That was his job. He spoke German, and they sent him over there. He never spoke to me about this until I was 50. My father was a very funny man, and he had absolutely no issues. He had no complexes, He was good. He was solid. I lost him a few years ago. So the second chapter is, or the next to the last chapter, is about the failure of these reconciliation ministries. And I actually said that in the book. So a lot of my reconciliation ministry friends aren't too happy with me right now. But I was saying, to the Jewish person, when you say that Israel can't exist, you're telling that Jewish person they can't exist. If you don't understand that, you're not getting it, period. So all these Jews who are pro-Palestinian, they have no idea. They have no idea. I agree. And I know so many of them. And of course, I went to the University of Chicago and Georgetown. I knew these professors. I went to UC Davis to give a little paper on the Ottoman Empire. And this Jewish professor, who was the chair of the history department, attacked me because I said something about Jerusalem, and she could sort of discern where I was coming from, although it was totally sub tabula, under the table. And she was so rude to me that the Turkish professors who organized it apologized to me. And I wrote a letter of protest to the chancellor of the University of California, Davis. That's how bad it is. And when I went out onto the campus, what did I see? Swastikas painted on every building I looked at. And it's a terrible, trashed up looking place anyway. So it was terrible. So I was just like, okay, I dip out into the world to see what's happening, and the report is bad. The report is bad. So wherever you are, thank God that you have a safe place where you can write and learn and think and speak up. The last chapter of this book is called At the Intersection of Sixth and Hope, A Generous Theology of History. So I've thought about this stuff my entire life. Really. I ended up at Biola, which was once located in downtown LA at the intersection of Sixth and Hope. I love that intersection because the sixth dispensation is this current dispensation of war, the age of war. The next one, if some people are right, it's the millennial kingdom. If not, it could be the eternal kingdom. I'm not going to argue eschatology with you tonight. But the idea is that God is going to return in power and reign over this sorry earth. Hallelujah. Amen. But I think that there has been a mistake made by many people as they think about the church, Israel, history, all of that. And I know that right now, in this current political climate, the word inclusive has some bad connotations. But I do believe that when you study world history and you see and you believe that God is the sovereign of the universe and he is the ruler, then all peoples, are under his rule in some way or another. And God is working in them. Now, what's the evidence for that? Okay, I'm at Biola. They have a school of missionary studies. You've got missionaries all over the place at Biola. And I had to teach history of the Christian church. Now, imagine how odd that was and such a blessing for a Jewish kid be tasked with actually writing and speaking and teaching church history. I was stunned by this. Sometimes I would cry when I was, even before my stroke, I would cry in services because I would be like, God, how is this even possible? Thank you for giving me this awesome job. Lord, I thank you for that. And I knew the story of all of these peoples who, for whatever reason, somehow got reached and have joined. And even though they didn't understand, they don't understand Ephesians 3:6. Most people don't necessarily even know that verse. But I was trained by a theologian at Biola called Bob Sosi. Bob Sosi passed away a number of years ago. But he told me, Judith, God has you on this campus for a reason. You need to straighten out your thinking on Israel, because I was kind of, I was little. And he said, no, you need to understand your calling. And Ephesians 3:6 in the New International Version says, and I have this at the beginning of my book, I don't want to misquote it. This mystery, the mystery of the church, is that through the gospel, the Gentiles are heirs together with Israel. That's not in the Greek, but Bob Sosi insisted on it. He said, if you don't understand what this verse is saying, you're missing the whole point. Members together of one body and sharers in the promise of Yeshua HaMashiach. That means that under him, all of us, from whatever people, race, language, whatever, tribe, clan, we're all under him, even if we don't know him. It's a shattering thought when you think about this, to think that there really is we know from Rosh Hashanah, right? We celebrated the creation, not just of the world, but of mankind. We're all one family in him. We don't see it that way anymore. We used to sort of get it in Western civilization, but the politics of our times has eroded that. I also had another quote that I had to include, and that was something that I ran across when I was studying the chapter on reconciliation in the second book of Corinthians. It's really good on reconciliation, and I wanted to see if I missed anything. I just decided, okay, I'm going to read a little bit more because this is so good. I'm not going to stop. And I ran across this line. Now is the day of salvation. Now, if you know Hebrew, salvation is Yeshua with a hey at the end, which is God. The God of our salvation, the name of Jesus is Yeshua in Hebrew. And it jumped off the page at me. So I ran to my Arab Bible, because I like to read my Arab Bible just to see what I might be missing. And sure enough, it says Yom Yeshua. And then I looked in the Hebrew translation of the New Testament, and it says Yom Yeshua. I was like, okay, I'm good. This is it. This is the age, not just of war, of the church, of grace. Those are the three big ones, right? No, this is the age of salvation. And everyone has a chance to enjoy the freedom we have in our Messiah, our Savior, our King, our God. Oh boy, I have so much more I could share with you, because I taught Islamic history for many, many years. And of course, when I study something, I become somewhat of an expert, because that's just how I have to be. And there's been a revolution in the study of the Quran. There's now a group that calls themselves Quranists, which means they just read the ancient texts of the Quran and try to figure out what it may have actually meant originally. So what they're doing is what we call in history historicizing the Quran, putting it in its historical context and trying to understand it on its own terms. And so therefore, there's a lot in the Quran that actually comes directly from Paul, the Apostle Paul. So for example, even the word jihad, it's fight the good fight. That verse. The good fight is jihad. There are so many others. I won't go on and on. But I think that now you get the idea of what's in my book, and I think I should stop. I think you've been a rapt audience, so thank you so much for listening, and now I'm happy to take questions. Don't be shy. Yes, Nikki.
Hey, so You know, I'm really involved, especially some of my projects in the African American community.
You have to speak up. Maybe
I'm
maybe
really
stand up and do that thing.
okay. Hi. Okay. Do you want to face that way or face that way? To
Face
ask
the
my
group.
question? Okay.
I'm listening.
All right. So Judith, I'm really involved in some of the projects I'm doing right now, and some of the African American communities in LA, and some of the film projects. And what I've noticed is a huge shift, starting with BLM, and which was all about, was many of us supported initially, and because it was about Black Lives Matter, of course, all lives matter, but not in a way that Black lives don't, And so, but now I've noticed such a shift in terms of the Black community in America. I don't know if it's all over the world, identifying with the Gazans as victims and with Israelis as the colonizers. And so they've adapted this identification, this sort of anti-Israel as the colonizing oppressor. And it's shocking to me. I'm like, we supported you and now you're against us. So I'm a Jewish believer also. So could you address that, and how do we educate on that, because it's so toxic and nobody wants to talk about it.
Okay, so that's a really big question for historians because we've seen this shift. There was a shift led by a guy named Howard Zinn to sort of focus on social movements in the United States and to say, traditional history is all about white guys dominating everybody else and, Western imperialism and colonialism. So we're all evil. We all participated, so we should all just be destroyed. So that idea, as sickening as it may be, it means that we have failed completely in this country and everywhere in the West, as many people are writing about this now, to educate about our own people and our own citizens about what it means when you talk about American exceptionalism and what is different about the United States and Europe. What bad things did the Europeans do? Oh, sure, my students know all the bad things. We study slavery, imperialism, every bad thing you can think of. But what do we blame it on? Human nature. Believe me, if you're the dominant person or group, you're going to use it and oppose and oppress other people because that's what people do. Unfortunately, I'm not justifying anything that was done in the past, except I would say that there are important things that we did accomplish in this country and in Europe. So Europe is difficult for me because it collapsed into Nazism. So it's hard for me to write like pro-Western stuff as a Jewish survivor's child. Western civilization did kind of collapse, and church history kind of collapsed because now people say, well, they were all Christians and look what they did, so that's why the churches of Europe were empty. But the churches of Europe started to fill up again when some Muslims began converting to Christianity, and there is a church in Europe again thanks to Muslim converts. I want you to know that. That's so important. In the United States, we didn't get stained by the Holocaust because we fought the Nazis. And there were some Europeans who did too. I mean, I'm not trying to ignore the French resistance. But that word, resistance, it used to be such a noble word. And now it's the opposite of what it once meant. Getting back to the Black community, there are many Blacks who know their Bible and who are preaching the Bible and they're in the Bible. Everybody else who's been like not reading the Bible and talking about the beloved community and social justice has started to get deceived by this intoxicating power trip that is, the social justice movement. So this is a deep topic, Nikki, and I don't know how to undo the damage, but the only answer for me is to completely, uphold reading the Bible and studying it and being discipled in good churches and talk about human rights and where do they reside. They don't reside in the UN. They don't reside in the councils of Europe and the United States. They reside in our Creator who created us. And when you're not afraid of God anymore, two things happen. You're not afraid of God, so you don't mind rebelling against him. In fact, you sort of delight in it. You know, like, oh, I don't believe in God. I'm going to do everything I want and have fun. And, you know, and I'm going to take what I want because there's no reason not to. So you lose everything. And then you become prideful. And what happened? Pride goeth before the fall. Remember I talked about descent? So your spirituality descends. Because once you fall, you have no defense against the evil ones, either the human evil ones or the principalities and powers. And you know the big guy, the guy who fell hard, right? And who still is part of the picture. Okay, I think that's enough for that one too.
Can you speak a little more about the failure of reconciliation ministries and movements? Because same where we are at Biola, I think there's still an attraction to that. There's still an appeal for that, and yet, I mean, I agree with you. I mean, where's the proof that it works? It doesn't seem to be very effective. So maybe unpack that a little bit more.
I believe in reconciliation at the foot of the cross. Because humility allows you to confess your own sin. And then if you both confess sin to each other and to God, then reconciliation is absolutely possible. But if you're in denial and it's all about you and your rights, there's no reconciliation. Because some Christians have even taught, give up your rights, lay down your life, do not fight. And that has been one way. And I don't think that's what God is calling us for. I think he's calling us to stand up for everyone and to say, in God, you know, we are something. We are worthy. He values our lives. And so your life is valuable, not just mine. And so if it's all about nationalism, whether it's Jewish nationalism or Palestinian nationalism or American nationalism, if it isn't redeemed by the fear of God and humility and obedience, and to know that we only have the right, as far as our own body, to tell someone else what to do. So we need consensus. We need to have a common language. We do not have a common language, people. You might read a word on a page and someone says, you know, peace. Well, peace sounds good if you define it certain ways, but what if peace means something completely different? What if, and you know, even the word submission. Submission can be a good thing. Submission can be a very bad thing. So every word is pregnant with both sides, right? So let's talk about realism, you know, and reconciliation. I do not believe that there's going to be reconciliation between the Palestinian fighters and the Israelis for many decades, because this war has harmed both sides so deeply. The grievous wound that was, you know, caused by this attack on Israel, and then Israel's response. But in my book, I trace that this was okay, people have made fun of people like me who try to show, well, why did this happen? Let's have context. You know, they don't want to hear about the context. They just want, oh, this is bad, you know, and let's forget the whole thing. No, so I believe the context is important, and to see that Hamas has existed since 1980, actually since 1986. The official line is 1987. The PLO declared the state of Palestine in 1988. Okay, it's been out there. There are countries in the UN who have recognized the state of Palestine for a long time. I think that there are actually more states in the UN that have recognized Palestine than have recognized Israel. So what do we do about this? The Palestinians have suffered grievously, and they're upset with everybody for allowing this to happen. The Arab world has been cowardly in some ways, and their public pronouncements, but secretly they have cooperated with the U.S. and Israel in some cases, especially Jordan and even Iraq. You know, Egypt is kind of weird, and we don't really have a clear take on Egypt. Lebanon is also kind of like happy that they don't have Hezbollah, but Hezbollah is going to come back. Syria, with this jihadist in a suit. Nobody who's a Christian in Syria believes that Golani is a good guy. Nobody does. So we're in a web of deceit, lies, and darkness. The Israelis call this war the war of darkness, and indeed I agree with that. So reconciliation way too early. But the cessation of hostilities will happen if Hamas lays down its arms unconditionally. And does not participate in the governance of Gaza, and the PA does not have clean hands. Do you know one of the things that I was most shocked to see during this war? In the halls of Congress, these demonstrators came into our Congress. These are American citizens. They had their palms painted red. This is a reference to what they call a lynching in Ramallah, when these Israeli soldiers got lost and ended up in the middle of Ramallah, and the police tried to save them, took them to a police station, but then the mob got hold of them and slaughtered them, and the young man who was involved strode his bloody hands up. There are people wearing pins of that.
On the enemies too.
By a Jewish woman. So we live in a matrix of darkness. It's kind of hard to take, right? The only way that I could cope with this whole thing was writing about it. Okay, I see a question back there.
I just want to add something to what you just said. 4 hours ago, Hamas put a condition on the thing and said that just 4 hours ago this happened, and they said that they would not release the hostages unless they could pray afterwards.
Yes, everyone can't hear you. So she was just saying that Hamas has basically rejected the terms of the Israeli-American agreement. Okay, Cyril.
Yeah, I feel your pain as a Jew born in France, grew up in the United States over 50 years. I've been here. I've never seen the level of hatred towards the Jewish people in Israel that I've seen now. And it's like the raging hatred. And I'm up into it all the time. I've heard you talk about views on that, but I haven't heard you mention anything about what the prophets say about what's going to happen. That's where I find my solace. Is things like you said are horrible right now, all over the world,
Yep.
and it's grievous. And where is it going to end up? I find it in the scripture, and so I'm not surprised when I read Zechariah chapter 12. It talks about the day when all the nations come against Israel. And what just happened in Ukraine, 2/3 of the countries walked out of Bibi Netanyahu. It's already here. The
Yeah.
nations are coming against Jerusalem. And God says that they're all going to be drawn to Israel to wipe us out. And they're going to be judged. And can I just quote the scripture out of Joel? Joel chapter 3. The word of God says, "For behold, in those days and in that time, when I bring back the captives of Judah and Jerusalem, I will also gather all nations and bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat, and I will enter into judgment with them there, on account of my people, my heritage Israel, whom they have scattered among the nations. They have also divided up my land."
Okay, let me respond. Thanks, Cyril. So prophecy did say that the Jewish people would be regathered in unbelief, and they would go back to Israel without understanding who the Messiah is, and that has been fulfilled. We know that every government on earth is what you might call interim, that each government that's established by man ultimately will fail for whatever reason. You try to preserve governments because the governments were designed by God to restrain evil. That's their basic job. When they no longer restrain evil, their purpose is no longer. So that regime will fall. So every regime that is set up ultimately by man, without being grounded, and this is tricky and hard, nobody's figured it out yet, but we're trying, it's really messed up. If we use the wisdom of the Lord, maybe we can forestall the collapse of our societies, but that's not guaranteed. So what happens in the Middle East also happens around the world. Now, what is the point of studying politics, seriously, or international relations? We're supposed to be able to understand how people use power. People have created laws. Some of the laws are good, a lot of the laws are bad. We're seeing that all the time. So it's the way the American founders understood this was that every political discussion is a battle. And you have to thrash out ideas and you hope that the best idea wins. But you have to compromise and you have to discuss and you have to get to the point where you both agree on some way forward. So in this interim time of the age of war, Cyril, I believe that it says, blessed are the peacemakers, and that means sometimes we have to agree to things that we don't love. Now, I have a big question. When I went to Israel as a young person for the first time, I looked around and I saw a lot of things that weren't right in the Jewish side and on the Arab side. And I was really shocked because I thought, oh, this is the homeland. Everything should be, butterflies and unicorns. And no, it's not. It's a mess. So how do you survive in an age of war? That's it. And post-World War II has been an experiment in trying to restrain another big world war. We were on the verge of a third world war, on the verge. But it didn't happen because people used politics pretty badly, but they also used weapons. So you have to fight to survive, and life is what has to be preserved. So yes, the prophets tell us that the day will come when God is going to return and judge the nations, and it's going to be a bad day for a lot of people. That's not up to us. That is completely beyond our control. It could happen now, or it could happen a long time from now, but it will happen. I agree with you. But until then, until this interim period of salvation, my job is to edify the church, the Muslims, the Jews, to the best of my ability with whatever tools I have, and try to prevent more killing. I don't know. And if Israel decides to make a deal with some kind of entity that is not going to be the PA or the Palestinian Authority, and it's certainly not going to be Hamas, I can tell you that right now. If the Arab states and the basis of the Abraham Accords has any merit, if it's not a lie and a big deception, because you never know, you just can't take one thing for granted. Because right now, we're all cozy with Qatar, the country Qatar, which we know.
Qatar's good.
Yeah, Qatar's good. No, it has been funding the Muslim Brotherhood for, ever. And they have housed the criminals and protected them when they could have arrested those guys. So we don't know. We are not in the inner councils, but I'm not too sure that the people in the inner councils know what they're doing. So we have to pray that God would be merciful, right? Just God, bless us with your wisdom, the Ruach HaChokhmah, give us the wisdom, Lord, to understand our times and to know how to act. And let's worry about the big concluding chapter because that's not on us. Let's just fight to preserve life. Okay, Darren.
Yeah, thank you for that. William Blackstone. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about, you have that legacy, mobilizing the evangelical Christian Church of America, Zionism. Do you have any thoughts about the Blackstone legacy in 2025?
I'm amazed that you're asking me this question, Darren. Well, I don't know what to do. I first my vision was for an academic program that would be Christ-centered, that could be housed at Biola. That was an idea whose time hadn't come, let's say that. So I left. After being away from Biola for 7 years and then being redeployed in the 8th year, my vision actually broadened so that by writing this book, it's bigger, the audience is different, it's not about academic programs, it's about you. It's about everybody in this group. Paul and I have funded this book completely so that I'm like totally in control. Nobody can tell me what to do or say. I didn't want to have to change anything, and even the mistakes. I just live with them. But what is the future of the Blackstone legacy? What can we do? What should we do? We need help because Paul and our vision is small. But we believe that the vision is bigger. We just need help figuring it out. So, I don't know. Let's see what the Lord does. The idea eventually was to have a memorial to William E. Blackstone in Israel. But we had a big, major European donor that wanted to give us several $1 million for this project. But the place that we wanted it was a Christian kibbutz, and they didn't want any European money because it's so anti-Israel. They didn't want to give anybody an opportunity to mess with what they were doing. So we had to stop, full stop, no memorial, no nothing. We haven't been raising money. We haven't been spreading the word. The Institute or the center is just my platform for, for doing my thing and for Paul's thing as well. So he's an author as well. Yeah. Still big book to come. Yes, sir.
Thanks for your presentation. Looking forward to reading your book. With the multiplicity of these Islamic terrorist groups, can you give us just a high-level overview of the differences and distinctions? We've got the Muslim Brotherhood, Hezbollah, we've got Hamas, ISIS, Al-Qaeda. If they're all from the same theological root, why are there so many different ones as opposed to just having all of them doing the same thing at the same time? What are the differences?
Okay, so that's a big question. That's a year-long course, but I'm going to give it a shot, okay? So first of all, there's two aspects of the Islamic world, the Shiite side and the Sunni side. Then also, there's like this big group of Muslims who are secularized and they don't know a clue about either side. Iran is kind of Shiite central. And after the Iranian Revolution, they completely changed the ideology of the Shiite movement. They turned it into basically something along the lines of the French Revolution. They looked at European thinking on revolution and they said, yeah, that's what we want. So they're kind of, in a way, associated more with modern European politics than Shiism. I could go on for a long time on that.
So
I won't.
that would be like oppressed, oppressor, Foucault type of stuff?
Yes, and I would say left wing, I could get just too many things to say about that. So, but it's relatively small in that the mullahs have their congregations in Iran, and then they have seeded the Middle East with their proxies. So Hezbollah, where's the guy who asked me the question? Yeah. So Hezbollah is a proxy. Bashar al-Assad and the Ba'ath regime, it's such a long story, they kind of became Shiite acolytes as well, which is totally unexpected. There's some Shiites in Iraq that you probably remember from our wars there. There's Shiites, the Houthis in Yemen. So they've been stirring up trouble and using it to fight against the Arab monarchs. Basically, the Al-Qaeda story where Sunnis from Saudi Arabia were opposed to the Saudi monarchy and then they went to Afghanistan. So you've got a long, long trajectory on all of those things. Then you had in the Arab world the Nasserists, if you will, and the Ba'athists. They were secular. They were not like Muslim. Now Saddam switched over to becoming a Sunni near the end of his regime and got all religious, and he wanted to kind of, sort of reclaim the Sunni mantle. So Al-Qaeda, ISIS, They, like the Muslim Brotherhood, which was founded in 1924, the year that the Turks nullified the caliphate, they want to restore the caliphate. That's their goal. What is the caliphate? They don't even know. Okay, people? I'm just going to tell you that after teaching Islamic history, they don't know. They think they know, but they don't. Okay, I'm getting a little tired, so I'm going to have to wrap this up pretty soon. Okay, how about with you?
You said before when you're speaking that you said you don't like Christian Zionists, or and then you said you, but then you said you. I didn't.
Yeah.
I was confused with what
Yeah.
you meant.
Okay, so there are some things that some of the Christian Zionists have said over the years that I thought were sort of heavy-handed and not very thoughtful, because I like thoughtfulness. I think that one of my perspectives has always been that when you support Israel, right or wrong, there's more nuance than that, because there are many people who support Israel but have issues like whatever on economics or society or policies, religion, all kinds of things. So, but what I appreciate about the Christian Zionists is that they say, well, that's Israel's problem. You know, like Israel has to figure out all that. We're just going to support Israel no matter what. And as I've worked on this problem for a long, long time, I've actually come around to actually saying, you know, that's not such a bad thing. So I've never been up until, well, I'll just say, Netanyahu has not been my favorite guy over the years. I didn't like how he was using Hamas for his purposes, and my book is full of that kind of information. But despite all of his mistakes, which I think are many, he has been, you know, put in the position to defend Israel. And but for the grace of God, go us. Like, how would you like to have to figure this out? So whatever his issues and problems and mistakes have been, I still like respect anybody who's in the fray. I remember I used to pray for Condoleezza Rice, you know, when she was in office, just because who would want to have to make those decisions? They're like no good decisions. So I just think that there is something true about just supporting the Jewish people. The state of Israel, to me, is also an interim situation, because I pray that the Lord will, you know, be known by my people. That's my prayer. And if that happens, that doesn't mean anything, because Christians still screw things up royally, right? And Jewish Christians are going to be just like any other Christians. Their state is going to be like, you know, Constantine's or, you know, Italy, whatever. We don't know. So that's why we have to be humble and circumspect and respect people who are willing to put their necks on the line, you know, to serve their people to the best of their ability. That's my answer. So with William E. Blackstone, I'm a Christian Zionist. I just think that it's the godly thing to do. Yeah. Okay. I have this. Okay. Did you ask me a question yet?
I made a comment.
Okay. Go ahead.
I haven't asked a question.
Sure.
So your description of Karl Barth, Bible in one hand, and Scripture in the other hand. My question's about
What's that? The Bible in one hand and the newspaper in the other one.
And preach, not pray, because
Yeah.
people think he said pray, but it's preach. So it's to the pastors out there.
Yeah, and I think of Karl Barth, and he's known notoriously in our circles for a bunch of stuff. But one thing that he was known for was standing up against the Nazis, him and Bonhoeffer. While a lot of other churches and pastors were late to the game, and even some say that Barth was a little late in speaking up. But like, what's the role of the church now? Because these kinds of conversations, I see them happen a lot in the parachurch. But if I'm being honest, in the church, in the Christian circles that I kind of swim in, I'm often hearing from church leadership, we just want to teach the gospel. We won't want to speak to that cultural stuff.
That's right.
As though our Christian worldview doesn't give us any guidance. And
Right.
then I just see the people in our churches, they're going to get that information and guidance from somewhere, from someone.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, do you have any practical tips for pastors or people in the church for navigating this stuff in church?
Yeah, I would say to those pastors that, number one, you can't get off the hook anymore. to decide where you stand. And then you got to start looking at this stuff. You can't pretend like it doesn't matter. I meet pastors who, fantastic people, they have their opinions, but they have very little knowledge. And when you have people who, we have more available to us about the Bible and about politics and history than any other generation in history. We have so much, a wealth of information, but you need good interpretation. You need to have good teachers. And politics and history is very low on the totem pole, even in Christian higher ed. Believe me, it's the cheapest department and the least important. And that's got to change. And the only way that can change, funders. People have to say, no, we want excellence. We want excellence in our churches. We want a pastor who's going to be able to teach with the newspaper and preach with the newspaper. But I need people who are anointed. I don't want some fool up there telling me what to think. I need to hear the word of God preached in a way that actually is true, and not prevarications and softening this and that, and being afraid of politics. Oh, we don't want to talk about that. How often have we heard that? But if you're a member of a church like me, I'm a Jewish believer. That is not comfortable, because Jews, people say, oh, they're loud, they're obnoxious, they're this, they're that, and here I am trying to be gracious and quiet and sweet. I want everyone to love me, and yet I'm standing up. And I just had to say, God, do you want me to be in the church? Or do you want me to be, at home in my condo doing the things I enjoy? And the Lord just, he's been telling me, no, I need you out there. And I'm like, okay, Lord, in your strength, not in my strength. Because, my time is nearly past. It really is. God has given me this extra time, and I've used it well because I'm thankful. So gratitude for what God has provided. I'd like to see some good teachers teaching just about the United States and what an awesome place it is. People are afraid to say that in the pulpit. How about our law? It just drives me crazy. Oh, Christian nationalism is so evil. Well, do you even know what that is? And do you even, or if you go on Grok or any of the AI things, how would you characterize President Trump? Oh, he's an authoritarian. He's a totalitarian. And then when you actually say, well, what about this and what about that? You stick a little book in there and you say, oh yeah, this is what conservatism is supposed to be. We need some good teaching in politics and economics and history, people. How else are we going to navigate all this other military stuff and social change? And how do we have and cultivate love for the Lord and for our fellow man? Yes?
I must have been sleeping during my 30 minutes of Bible, but I never heard the term like theology.
Called the super succession.
Can we talk about the history of it? I feel like it's increasing. What's the genesis of it?
So what you'll hear is that there was a guy named Darby in the 19th century who started defending this, premillennial dispensationalism, and that it's all a new thing. But supersessionism is very old. It actually started even in some of the teachers in the first century of Christianity. But it was not the prevalent view. And of course, I'm not going to try to get into all the details. But by the time you get to Ignatius, where he's setting up the church sort of bishops and how these churches are going to be organized, you have the idea that really gets institutionalized, that the church has replaced Israel, and there's no place for the Jewish holidays, there's no place for Hebrew, there's no place for any sniff of the Sabbath, none of that. That's all, Galatians condemned. No, they're just misreading everything. So it's as old as time. Supersessionism means that the church has replaced Israel. And anyone with eyes to see can see that is just not true.
Amen.
The Jewish people lives, no matter what they tried to do to us, because we're the witnesses. Tertullian, who isn't known for being a Jewish lover, he said that the Jewish people are the hinge of what we know about about God, because without the Jewish people, we would just have the Spirit, a spirit God, and it could look like anyone. It could look like a mirror, and you could look into it, and you are God. But the Jewish people proves that Jesus came from a people, and his people lives because we preserve the knowledge of God. Without the Jewish people, the New Testament would just be empty words. Every word in the New Testament is grounded in the Hebrew Scriptures. And if you miss it, you've missed everything. I get a little excited when I talk about this. Yes, sir.
Very stimulating conversation tonight. My question is if you could elaborate on your title. What is the ashes? Where's the beauty? And how did you land on that title?
So you might have come a little late, but that's okay. In Isaiah 61, it says that in the context of the mourning of the people who have been judged and exiled, that God is going to return and the Jewish people will return to their homeland someday. That God will never fail. The ashes are a sign of mourning. At funerals, Jews in ancient times put ashes on their head. The Hebrew of that is that God replaces those ashes with a crown of beauty. So to make it simple, the preferred translation just says beauty because people get stuck on the crown. You could have tiara, you could have garland, you could have other things. But the idea is that this beautiful thing on your head lifts your head. And it's a wedding. It's about the wedding. It's about the wedding, to me, the wedding feast of the Lamb. That ultimately, God is going to redeem all things. We will not forget. He remembers every tear. He knows. He knows. He's with us, and he's in exile with us in this, fallen world that we're in. But God created us for his purposes. And what is our purpose? The Westminster Confession, says to glorify God, right? So I have a name that glorifies God. It's really cool. Judith means Yehudi, which means, Jewess, but it also means she who praises Yah. That's my name. Then Mendelssohn is via German. It tracks back to the Comforter, the Holy Spirit. So that's my middle name. And then Rude, now don't get me started talking about, I just recently discovered that Rude doesn't just mean cross. I was reading Hosea in Hebrew, and I came across Hosea 12. I was focused on unrepentant Israel and the parable of the two debtors. There's a woman of the city who repents and washes Jesus' feet and anoints his feet with, this repentant woman kind of seized my imagination, and I sort of saw Israel as the repentant woman. It's sort of exciting. So I'm reading Hosea, and I get to 12:1, and it says, Ephraim will be scattered, but Judah will stand firm. It's like, what? And what is the word for standing firm? In Hebrew, it's my name, Rude. It's Rod Rude. I looked it up in Strong's Concordance, because that's how I am. And it says all kinds of things. One thing is, it can mean wandering. So the wandering Jew motif? The Jews, the teaching of contempt, hatred for the Jews, but they're a witness to what happens when you don't, accept the Lord. It's a very ugly teaching of Augustine. Well, actually, wandering can be a good thing. Tolkien says, all who wander are not lost. So wandering, I like that. And then I started thinking about Jesus in exile, which I mentioned to you, that he's in exile with his people. In his life he didn't have a place to lay his head, and now he has no presence in Jerusalem, right? So I was really moved by this. And what does Rod mean? It means kingdom, realm. This is kind of cool. The cross is a symbol of the kingdom. The Christ is king thing, only it's a thing. I suddenly transformed my thinking about many things. And of course, I have students from all different perspectives on left and right, and a lot of people on a lot of us. think it's really scary what we saw with the Charlie Kirk funeral because it seemed like too much of a blend of politics and religion. So they're very uncomfortable with this. But I was thinking, yeah, there are two kingdoms even now. There's the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of God, and the kingdom of man. But we are citizens of both. And we're salt and light in this world. What are we supposed to do? We're supposed to testify that we believe in God, kill us. We don't care. We're going to stand up for the Lord. And you know what? When you believe that, you really don't care what people say, what threats may come your way, what bad things people might do to you. Believe me, when you put your book out like this, you get some bad stuff. I don't care. Whatever is a loss is a gain. So I love the Lord, and I've always loved him since I got saved when I was 25 at the University of Chicago through InterVarsity and Jews for Jesus. And I've been walking with the Lord for many, many years, and I'm so thankful, I'm so thankful. So I'm really grateful to all of you for listening to me so raptly. I love my audiences. Please stay in touch with me. I have cards with my contact information. If you do read my book and you want a little pitch, review it on Amazon because it makes a difference. I need those algorithms. But it is going to be word of mouth because I'm not advertising this to the big body because it's too dangerous, frankly. And I don't really want to attract the wrong kind of attention. It's already, kind of fun out there. So, yeah, just thank you. Any final question or comment? Yes, Mike?
Yeah. So, like after October 7th, it was very illuminating, especially in the Christian world, how people reacted to it. And at the very least, we have all stuff happening on campuses. Christian leaders will make declaration and then I'll be somewhat silent in my religion. I've lost it a bad thing and then just sentence after sentence, just focus on Israel and the war and Senator Salon.
Right.
That seems kind of easy to see. But for a lot of us who teach on Christian campuses, I am noticing a lot more of kind of the conservative and right-wing anti-Semitism starting to creep in because so many of our students are, online, TikTok, and there's only so much we can do in the classroom and push these books. I mean, I talk about Rabbi Heschel and King as like models, and they're like, yeah, they're old. Like that just seems light years away from them.
Right.
So I don't know if you maybe comment to a lot of us who are on Christian campuses and thinking, actually maybe it isn't the kind of left-wing response we're worried about. It's actually kind of this kind of right-wing.
I think we need to be worried about both sides.
Yeah.
Because I used to always be worried about, the Aryan Nation and all the right-wing people, and they're out there. But I'm much more terrified right now with the funding that's going into the Antifa world, because those people are actually attacking people. And, I remember very well my history and what happened in the past with, gangs of men who are not in a militia, but who are sort of almost in a militia, beating people up in the streets in Europe. Like that was part of fascism. So when people say, oh, he's a fascist, I'm like, yeah, no. Like if you see Republicans beating people in the streets, then I'll be worried. But I just don't see it. So in answer to your question, both sides are really bad. There is, the Nazis are kind of, they like everybody, whatever, just join us. And that's what happened in Germany. And when I was on the Biola campus, I was seeing it all the time. Right, left, mostly left. No, we don't want that Jesus mural. Too Jewish, take it down. I could go on. Golly. Okay, Nikki.
Okay, so, as a Jewish believer, there are just things that, can everybody hear me?
Not really.
Okay, as a Jewish believer, there are things that just viscerally, like we know about our people, they're just culturally, it's like, no, Well, for the most part, Israelis are not trying to do revenge. That's not what's motivating them, which is what's presented through the media.
No,
So-
there's some revenge for
There's
sure.
some, but
I mean,
it's for the
Israel
most
was
part.
gang raped. I mean, that
Yeah.
attack was unbelievable.
Right, right.
So yeah, they're definitely taking a revenge. I wouldn't soften that.
Yeah, well,
They are
I'm
being measured. However, if you read, I think his first name is John Spencer, who is sort of an expert on warfare. He has said Israel has fought with such restraint and honor that it's not purely vengeance, but when you kill 43,000 people, that's pretty.
Okay, so
That's
here's what-
big. That's
here's-
not big, and
Right.
that's really big.
But here's what I want to tell you. So I got a call about 2 weeks ago from one of my former interns who wound up going over and joining the IDF. And he's kind of brilliant. He's like a boy genius, and he's on the strategy. And he said a couple of things, and it's made me, it's made me ammunition and made me think, and I want to present them to you. One of them is about the numbers. He said, he told me nobody knows the number of people that have been killed because we're in the middle of a war. And that even in the Holocaust, and I'm just telling you what he said, and I would love your feedback. He said in the Holocaust, the way they came up with the 6 million was after the war was over, they went town to town and said, okay, how many people were here, how many are alive?
what's the point?
So the point is, okay, so I'm just telling you some things that I was told and I'm asking for verification here. So he was saying that really these numbers are all coming from the, the health, Gaza health thing. There's really nobody knows the numbers. We can't trust it. Number two, he also said, I was asking, so what about the towns being leveled? And he was saying that the IDF is heartbroken over doing that for the most. I mean, there's always bad actors everywhere. But he was saying that the only way they can't go into the tunnels because you can't do warfare in tunnels. If there's 2 soldiers, Israeli soldiers, and 2 Hamas and 300 Israeli soldiers, there's no way to surround them. They lose contact in all of their internet stuff. And in the same spirit, they've had to move the Gazans so that they can level the towns.
Right, I don't want to get into the weeds of all this,
Okay,
Nikki.
well, I
I'm
wanted
sorry,
to
I'm
know
really
what's the
running out of juice here.
Okay.
So
okay.
let's just
Okay,
move
okay,
on, okay?
Okay, I just
I don't want to answer.
You
I
can
just,
tell me later. What do you think?
I did
I
have
don't know
like,
who to believe. That's
one
what I'm
or
saying. I
two
don't think the facts are.
yeah. Any way you can. It would be just so nice just to say, I hope you had, a good fast, and I just want you to know that I care. And you want to go out and go shopping or something. I mean, any way you can, just be friendly and say you're not alone, whatever that may be. A card, a call. It would just be so nice, if people would just reach out and say hello. Thank you. That's a great question.
Well, I just felt like it wasn't a question, but regarding replacement theology and what he was talking about, I do feel Christians really underestimate what's happening. I keep a close watch on social media. I look through the comment sections, and I'm just entrenched in a way without being consumed by
Yes,
it.
I know you are. It's
But
brutal out
I
there.
think it's really like a wildfire that's infiltrating even the Christian church big time. So
totally
I think it's
agree.
really important for people to.
They need to be shamed and blamed, and people have to stand up.
Yeah.
Because it's not just a matter of, well, they're stupid. You can't just dismiss all this. You have to take it like this is your life. Like this is actually your life. First the Jews, then the Christians, and then whoever else is in the way. Look at what's happened in Africa, and look at what's happened in the Middle East. It's not just about the Jewish people. It's about everybody who wants to be free, and to have life. Yeah, I saw some other hand back there. Yes, way back there.
I just wanted to thank you, Judith, for coming and doing this tonight. What a blessing, and I just thank you for your courage in writing the book and following God's leading to do it. So thank you, Judith.
Thank you, Kat. It means so much. So